Hello, everyone, and welcome to another SAPIR Conversation. This one, of course, is a live conversation, and at the end of it, you're going to have an opportunity to ask questions. I am delighted to be here with Adam Teitelbaum, who wrote a really interesting and provocative article in the SAPIR Aspiration issue called Boyz II Mensches. And its thesis, as we'll explore, is that there is a great deal of disaffection and feeling lost and confusion among young men, which is something that I think we've all read about or heard about. And he explores what the Jewish tradition can do to help address that problem. I'm going to leave his proposal for him to explain as we go along. But first, let me tell you a little bit about Adam himself. And he founded Level 3 Industries to uplift Torah wisdom and Jewish ritual as the foundation for fatherhood, after directing programs to Alpha Epsilon Pi, APAC, and Jewish Federation of North America. He's a proud husband and father of two boys. He grew up in LA and says he can't believe that he finds himself living in Cincinnati. How did you get to Cincinnati?
Well, obviously for the surfing and the weather.
That's like what people used to say about, that's what William Burroughs allegedly said when he came to England. They said, "Why are you here?" He said, "For the food and the weather."
It is, first of all, Cincinnati is an incredible place to raise a family. My wife's family's from here,
Uh,
multi-generational. And when we started building a family together in Washington, D.C., after meeting at the Holocaust Museum, which where else would two Jews meet to start a family,
yeah,
we decided to plant roots near, and it was between LA and here. And for a lot of reasons, Cincinnati makes a lot of sense.
good. I'm really glad to hear that. Um, so let's start with something that actually goes back a ways, um, because I remember Robert Bly talking about the problem of men many years ago when I was a young man. And that is, why is it so hard for men to
Hmm.
find their way in this society? And why and in what ways does this have implications for the lives of women in society?
Well, if I take just a quick moment as we start out to say, first and foremost, thank you to the SAPIR Journal and to the Maimonides Fund for opening what can sometimes be an uncomfortable and taboo conversation. And so to destigmatize it and to open it is an incredible opportunity. The other piece is just a note of opening with a little bit of Torah for us,
Great.
considering we moved yesterday's planned call to today because of what an apropos
Yeah.
poetic reason that you tied
Yes, let
into
me tell.
this week's Parsha, Tzariah, the opening line, the opening pasuk
Yeah.
is for Bris
So
Milah.
right. My niece, who is actually a rabbi in Atlanta, Rabbi Ariel Wolpe, and her husband John had a baby boy, and so I flew down to Atlanta to be at the bris. And I said to everyone, "I'm sorry, I just can't do the podcast that day." And everybody said, they were thrilled to put it off for this reason. And thank you for giving me the opportunity both to say Mazel Tov to the parents and welcome Ezra Gershon to the world. Very happy to have a new Jewish baby who was named for John's grandfather and for my father. So it was really wonderful, and my brother was overjoyed, as you can imagine. He has two granddaughters, and now he has a grandson. So thank you
Well,
for that
Mazel
opportunity.
Tov, LaTorah, LaChuppah, LaMasim Tovim, to all the things, the
Yes,
blessings that this will bring to the family.
yes,
I
amen.
think, look, the fact that this goes back as far as Robert Bly, and it goes even further than that. I mean, Pirkei Avot, even in some of our foundational texts, the question of masculinity, of what it means to be a man, what our responsibility is, how we show up in the world, these are questions and conversations that have stood the test of time. I mean, if anything, even Adam HaRishon, the first man, there's a big conversation about what's my role and responsibility in the world. And over time, there have absolutely been different societal pressures and different expectations and different conversations, which have led to a variety of different reasons why men have particularly struggled. And I think that what makes this moment unique, and one of the reasons why we have to be addressing this, is because there are certain aspects from a variety of levels, socioeconomic, in terms of job opportunity, the feelings of loneliness and despair that come up. These issues are not just a Jewish communal issue. These
Right.
are societal issues that are taking place, and the Jewish community is not immune from these realities. As much as I grew up in a beautiful Jewish community in Los Angeles, California, and I thought that the whole world was Jewish before I got to college. I mean, there's a lot about the insularity of the way we build Jewish community. But there's that great public service announcement that used to go on the 10 o'clock news. It's 10 p.m. Do you know where your kids are?
Right.
And that's a physical thing. Nowadays, on social media, you can be in your room, but exposed to a whole wide array of content that Jonathan Haidt talks about. The challenge is we focus on the physical safety of our kids, but not the emotional safety of our kids. And so if we're looking at the fact that right now, 12% of men who are of working age and able-bodied are disassociated from the workforce, that suicide is the number two cause of death of men just below my age demographic, and that people are feeling that they don't have economic opportunity. These are a lot of reasons why men who, if our role is seen as the breadwinner, as the primary provider for a family, can feel disorienting.
Yes.
And then,
So I want to jump in there about the and ask you to maybe wrap this into your answer. Um, when I was a young man, and I had three brothers, so it was a very boy-oriented family. First of all, my parents would let us leave in the morning and they would expect us home for dinner, and they never thought about it. And there were no cell phones, obviously, and no way to contact them. They just assumed. So there was a built-in independence and self-reliance. And there was an expectation that we would grow up and have families and be providers. And
mhm,
Scott Galloway, one of the writers on manhood now, says that men are supposed to provide, protect, and procreate.
mhm,
So I read that to someone recently, and they said that's so patriarchal.
mm.
And I wonder if both men losing their role and also not being able to figure out one that is societally acceptable is what we're dealing with here.
I think there's a huge piece of that. I don't know if you've watched yet, just another a plug for more content because I'm
Sure.
consuming this. The recent Louis Theroux documentary Inside the Manosphere on Netflix. And what
No.
we see in terms of the way that the manosphere finds resonance, especially with young men, is I think that it taps into something that is quite true of what people are feeling, but in like the negative image, like on a piece of film, the negative as opposed to the enlightened version of it. And what happens when we're blamed that we don't have any more high paying jobs because DEI is taking them away and giving them to women? Or saying the only men who are viable dating partners, and Galloway talks about this, are, I want a man 6'5", finance,
Right.
trust fund.
Right.
These markers that seem to be quite externalized, tied to money and things that perhaps are out of our control, and these notions of how come we can't have it all. These are absolutely pieces of ways that make the conversation taboo, which again is important why we're having it today. And I think that what we're seeing from in terms of female engagement, what's critical, and I love the work that Leading Edge in particular is doing, and Rachel Gildner with the SRE, that huge strides have been made in terms of salary transparency, in terms of elevating women to roles of senior leadership in major institutions and on boards. And the 70% of Jewish institutional roles are still held by women. And so the interaction for men at younger ages is still overwhelmingly with women only.
So I want to make one comment, then ask one question and get to your proposal. Um,
Yeah.
the one comment I want to make is that we, at the end of this conversation that Adam and I are having, We will be asking for questions, so please put them in the chat now, and I will be more than happy to ask your questions a little later in the hour. And in accordance with what you just said about interaction with women in professional roles, one of the phenomenon that has occurred, certainly has occurred in the rabbinate and is occurring in other places, is the feminization of professions. That once a certain number of women are in a profession, men seem to flee from that profession. And that is a problematic social development at best. And I wonder if you have thoughts that can help us understand that.
From a sociological standpoint, I don't think I'm equipped to be the one that provides the analysis. However, I do know that in Richard Reeve's latest book of Men and Boys, he
Hmm.
talks about how there have been this tremendous uptick in terms of trying to get women into STEM jobs. And a stat that he points to is that it's an uptick, and now I put it in front of me and I don't have it right here that in 1980, only 13% of STEM jobs were represented by women, and today it's 27%. However, there's a corollary that happens where we've seen the decline for men since 1980 in what he calls heel jobs, which now have this this notion that they are a feminine job, social work, healthcare, education. And we've seen a drop from 35% of men in these heel roles in 1980 to 26% now when he wrote the book in 2021. And I
Hmm.
think some of that is around a perception of also what the job is and what the expectations of that job are and how men can actualize themselves in those positions. And one of the things that we see that I think that there's an important notion to say, this isn't a healthy answer, that men who feel they can't be themselves, they can't just have, to use the now somewhat toxic phrase, locker room humor,
Right.
locker room
Right.
talk, and they feel they have to constantly police themselves, that lends to, if that is in an environment where that is seen as a negative, as opposed to how do we learn to treat everybody with decency and respect, then I think that people start to flee. And if I can add one more piece in terms of that, which I think is part of the drop off, which might be an elephant in the room in terms of how we have this conversation, but it's around affordability and the fact of the ways in which in today's world it is just unaffordable in a lot of ways to have a single family income where that one
Right.
person is working in a nonprofit.
Yeah.
There is, I have a friend, sort of case study of an upper middle class, 4 kids, Jewish education, mortgage, and they have upwards of a $30,000 a month cost of living. On
Wow.
an average Jewish nonprofit salary, according to some recent data, the median salary in the Jewish nonprofit world is $129,000. That's only 33% of the pre-tax amount to be able to actually be there. And so I think that for men who are looking for jobs of purpose, but also wanting to be competitive and wanting to succeed and wanting to drive innovation and change, if the
Right.
goal is to work for an organization that has to keep overhead low, that has to focus on relational advocacy as opposed to actually driving innovative change, I think that
That's going to
those
be
are
very
also.
hard. And I, I I mean, obviously, AI is not going to make this problem go away. In fact, it's going to make it more difficult. But I don't think we can solve all of society's problems in this. So let's move on to the question of what is your proposal and how do you think it might help these multiple dilemmas that you've so ably outlined?
Well, first and foremost, I think that the Bill Clinton line of everything wrong in the Jewish institutional and Jewish communal life can be fixed with everything right in Jewish institutional and Jewish communal life.
Okay.
The beauty of the Jewish tools and rituals and wisdom that we have, I think, are woefully underutilized and represented, especially in non-Orthodox Judaism.
Hmm.
And just as a parallel, what I want to bring in terms me um, that there's this book called Shop Class is Soul Craft by Matthew Crawford. Highly recommended for anybody. But there's just this one quick a passage that I want to read.
Please.
A decline in tool use would seem to betoken a shift in our relationship to our own stuff, more passive and more dependent. Indeed, there are fewer occasions for the kind of spiritedness that is called forth when we take things in hand for ourselves, whether to fix them or to make them. What ordinary people once made, we buy, and what they once fixed for themselves, we replace entirely.
Adam, unfortunately, I think you're frozen. You, Julie, Adam is reemerging. Let's see, and I don't know what the technical difficulty is, um, but clearly we need someone able, male or female, to get Adam up and running again. Uh, but in the meantime, I'll just say a word about this, which is that in my own experience, um, generally the young men who were more successful were those who had a very clear early path of their life and their career, and that became less and less and less common. Ah, there you are. We lost you for all of that reading. You were, you were, can't hear. There we go. I can hear you now. Yeah, we lost you for like a minute. We didn't hear the reading that you did. So,
Technology is
yes.
beautiful and amazing until it's not, even with the tech,
So tell
even
us,
with the
so
tech.
tell us your proposal.
So I'm not going to read the whole thing, but the subtext of it is that in a society where we no longer are using tools to fix our things, but rather relying on experts or just replacing
Right.
them with a new thing, we become disconnected. And there's a beautiful line in Michal Biton's essay in this SAPIR article also,
Right.
which talks about how institutions matter deeply, but they work best when they reinforce what happens at home. And so the proposal here, so now to dive right into the proposal of where we are on this, is that I believe looking at the bar mitzvah experience in particular, especially the way in which the non-Orthodox community uses bar mitzvah as a finish line, should be flipped on its head, and the bar mitzvah must become a starting gate. That it's not about training for a year or a year and a half to perform on one day at 13 years old at a time that fits into the synagogue's schedule within that year, but rather 13 is a moment of engagement into a reality that is what is Jewish life, holding each other accountable, learning how Jewish law and Jewish ritual applies to modern living, and then actually living that life. And the proposal that I think about is is creating, in a way, a Jewish Boy Scouts. How do we create cohorts, minions of bar mitzvah age boys that they themselves are now part of a chavruta? These 10 now men, according to Jewish law, work together to study on a routine basis for the next 6 years of their lives. And then when they graduate, when they become eagle men, nesher mensch, or whatever we would call it, they then turn their hand backwards and become mentors to the next generation. And then as they grow, one day, God willing, they will become fathers, they will become husbands and partners, and they will then also engage with the next generation.
So first, let me tell you that I think it is a beautiful vision. Um, And I do say that in prelude to the challenges that I'm going to suggest to it. But I think it's a beautiful vision. It's a lovely idea. And I think the analogy with the Boy Scouts is a really good one because it shows that with the right motivation and conditions, you can get boys to do things that people would dismiss and say, oh, my kid would never do that. And yet, obviously, in every generation, the Boy Scouts have drawn all sorts of different kinds of boys to be part of it. The first problem I want to talk about is the problem that religious schools have in general, which is it's hard enough to get teachers that keep people in religious school when every Jewish kid feels like they have to go for the bar mitzvah. How are
Totally.
you going to find compelling enough teachers to keep them when they've already been socialized to know that they don't have to go anymore because they're past bar bat mitzvah age?
I want to put an even finer point on that, which is
Yes.
according to data, by senior year, nearly 85% of those kids who were involved in Hebrew school at bar mitzvah age are no
Yeah.
longer enrolled in any sort of Hebrew school when they
Right.
graduate high school. So
Yes.
it's not just that it's like a compelling piece that they don't want to go, but their parents are making them. At a certain point, it drops off entirely for the family. The second piece of it is that I actually agree with you wholeheartedly that we cannot take already over-programmed families and teens and foist yet another thing on top of them. The program that I envision and the opportunity that I envision is that this is something that layers on top of what they're already doing to be able to do so Jewishly. This is the work of, I believe, Jewish life. And this is what I think that this kind of Boy Scouts experience can do. If they're involved in after school sports, amazing. How do you show up and understand teamwork and team dynamics according to Pirkei Avot? If you're involved in competitive dance or piano and art or anything else, how do you understand arts and culture from a Jewish lens? The other piece, which I think is a very important tie-in to Michal Biton's point here about institutions working when they elevate the family, is that we have an opportunity to reinvigorate and re-engage the interfamily experience in Jewish life. That Jewish life is not about externalized, I have to now go to a Hebrew school twice a week. What happens if we build a system integrated into this, similar to Shuki Taylor's article also in SAPIR about a Judaism of doing, where fathers on Friday nights are doing a Dvar Torah with their kids? I contend that a Judaism where a family conversation like that takes place with predictability, with routine, and with excitement has far greater implications for a longevity of Jewish life than simply ensuring that Hebrew school participation and registration stays high.
And if you were the rabbi of a congregation,
Yeah.
how do you get people who already are really hard to persuade to go to confirmation class, hard enough to persuade to go to Hebrew school, and sometimes even difficult to get to do a bar mitzvah? And their parents, the fathers ideally, yes, would do all this, but it's not so easy to get the parents involved who have the mentality of synagogue is something that I drop my kids off at. How do you change that society-wide dilemma and synagogue-wide dilemma? Because you're now the rabbi of the synagogue and you're giving the sermon or you're teaching the class. What do you tell them?
Well, to a certain extent, if I may, Rabbi Wolpe, as a
Yeah.
longtime congregational rabbi, I'm not necessarily proposing that I'm the rabbi of a synagogue. I think that this has an opportunity to be more systemic and broader. But to answer your question in terms of how might I encourage and engage buy-in and how could I inspire people to participate in this? First is I think that from my experience and what we've seen, a lot of people want to participate in Jewish life. They want to make it part of their home, but they don't know how to. And whether it's a sense of embarrassment or a sense of lack of knowledge, they aren't willing to try to do it themselves because maybe they are embarrassed to stumble through Kiddush in front of their kids, or maybe they don't know how to lead a Passover Seder. And so therefore, instead of engaging in it, they won't. And so it has to be an engagement with both generations simultaneously in this regard. I also think that this is about understanding one of the principles of Jewish engagement through tools, through use, that there is something beautiful about reframing Jewish ritual as a sense of obligation. If I wake up every morning and I think to myself, is today a day that I'm going to say Modeh Ani? Is today a day that I'm going to choose to keep kosher? It's a very different value proposition than I'm a Jew.
Right.
We keep kosher. I'm a Jew. I say Modeh Ani. I start my day with a sense of gratitude. And so I think that one of the challenges we face in today's society is that Judaism has become externalized, that Judaism has become an after-school activity that we have to do, as opposed to the thing that infuses everything we already do as a family.
It seems to there are some wonderful questions on the chat that I'm going to sort of combine and fuse in some ways, but it seems to me that the problem that you're identifying is more a problem of the Jewish home than it is a problem of the Jewish synagogue. Because a Jewish home where your soccer game is infused with Jewish learning is one thing, but how you get somebody who is knowledgeable about soccer and is a soccer coach to also give you Jewish teaching is going to be a lot harder. So there's a big resource issue with this that I would love to hear your thoughts about. And then second, one of the questions was, won't this feel to men like an additional burden? Girls don't have to do this, only boys do. So I wonder whether that's going to be problematic.
As a starting point, I think that I've met people over my career in the Jewish world who one of their first frames of reference is, oh, but I had a bar mitzvah. Or, well, I never had a bar mitzvah.
Yeah.
And this notion of, it's not even the I'm a bad Jew, it's the whether or not being Jewish is somehow demarcated by having had this ritualistic experience at a synagogue many years ago.
Yep.
And I think what we're seeing, first of all, going back to the affordability piece, I know families who deeply want their kids to have b'nai mitzvah, and people who, especially in a post-October 7th world, never thought about a b'nai mitzvah. The kids themselves, a 12-year-old in October 2023 says, I want to have a bar mitzvah. I want to do this public demonstration of my Jewish connection. But they have to be a member of a synagogue, which includes dues, and they have to go through this whole rigmarole to be able to then read Torah in front of their community. Rather than, I know other families who are coming up with really innovative and creative coming of age rituals demonstrating I am now 13, which means I am part of Jewish adulthood. Doesn't mean that on day one, I am now a Jewish adult. It means I now have ownership and responsibility for myself, which is, as you and I both know, and everybody on this call, that's a lifetime. That's a lifetime of learning and engagement. Second, in terms of the what the resources are for giving families and homes these types of experiences. Well, first is, I think, if we're looking at the long game here, that let's say that this program starts tomorrow, 10 years from now, you have 10 years of families who get to look back and say, wow, look how much we've grown. And the kids who are 13 now are 23. It's a whole different ballgame. And on Safaria or podcasts or the beauty of the way in which Jewish wisdom is accessible today is something that didn't exist. We say we have a repetition of the Musaf. Why? Because they used to not have prayer books. People literally couldn't read it themselves. Either they didn't have prayer books or they couldn't read. And so we had to create a system where somebody repeated it for everybody. We're no longer living in that world. What does the future look like? And then in terms of the girl question, I think this is critical. A very, very, very important piece of this whole conversation, which is, from my vantage point, it's a yes and. This is an everybody conversation. The ways in which boys and girls, especially who are young, are struggling right now are real and multifold. Jonathan Haidt's data again shows that the way that girls, young girls in particular with social media are struggling must be addressed in very real and substantive ways. And there is data that shows that the way in which boys and girls mature during these formative years from 14 to 17 are different. In fact, late diagnosis of ADHD in life, I've been doing a little bit more study about it. ADHD, according to psychologists, presents different in boys and girls. It's still there, but we have to understand it differently. My proposal and what I'm putting forth through this article is that I believe that it is worth having a unique and dedicated conversation about boys and men in particular right now as my starting point. And God willing, one day this enterprise is so large that it includes
Right.
everybody. And it doesn't negate all of the incredible work already being done within the Jewish institutional world to focus on elevating women and making sure girls and women have equal and great opportunities as well.
I just before I ask one or two more questions, I do want to remind you we have some wonderful questions in the chat. Please continue to submit them, and we'll get to them just a minute. I may have to abbreviate some of them, but I will do my best to get to as many as possible. I also wanted to ask you, in terms of programs that already exist. I mean, I remember years ago, I was a USY leader.
Mhm.
And actually, one of the questions Bob Meth asked about USY, and like that's what youth groups were supposed to do. And I see now, even in my synagogue, that's what later on confirmation classes are supposed to do. They have a varied experience and so on. Um, but the way society has gone is, as you mentioned earlier, it has gotten more and more and more crowded. So not as many kids are in USY because they have innumerable other activities and a screen and multiple screens. Um, and and I just it's hard to get this organic change from the bottom. And I wonder like what you think the first steps would be for a very ambitious program.
There, a beautiful question. So many layers to it. And I would contend and start with that I feel that part of the premise of that question comes from the institutions of the organized and sect-based Jewish institutions we have in the United States. That you are either a Reform Jew and you're part of NIFTY and you go to a Reform confirmation class, USY, you're a conservative Jew, so you're a part of USY, Orthodox, OU, NCSY, or BBYO, but you're filling in the blank there. And one of the things that I think is an opportunity to think about now, and Josh Foyer talks about this in the What is a Moonshot, is this is a chance to go big. And this is an opportunity to try something audacious because we will learn in the process. And I think when I was part of USY as well, one of the beautiful powers of USY was it created a community for me. That was a community that I had. These were friends I loved hanging out with. There was a lot of overlap with my camper mom in California. So it was an ongoing and continuous network for me to be a part of. In today's world, there's a New York Times article, Boy Crisis of 2020 Meet Boy Crisis of 1900 by Robert Putnam and Richard Reeves. That this isn't the first time in a society that has these kinds of institutions that's going through a changing of the guard or a changing of the systems that necessitate these innovations. And I think that if we're looking at this holistically, of how do we, again, Josh Foyer talks about the shift towards localized community, that it doesn't have to be just about USY, but we're creating communities in and of themselves. So the families, whether like I think Chavara, by the way, the conservative movement's Chavara program, this
Right.
kind of a program could be a beautiful reinvigoration into something where we as a family are going to have Shabbat dinner anyway. How do we get 10 other families in our community to come do Shabbat dinner with us, rather than a Tuesday night? And I mean, I think it's an open conversation with somebody like you or the people who are living this day in and day out. where are the opportunities for synagogues to look at their engagement metrics and their programs and their offerings differently to meet people where they are, and inspire them to be part of these kinds of institutions?
And I'm going to start on the questions by I'm going to start with our most prolific question asker, Anonymous. Um, and Anonymous wants to know, is there an acceptance of your proposal in any location? What's being done to obtain male teen buy-in that you've seen work?
I love that. Anonymous, by the way, thank you for that donation during Larry David's, Kirby. I'm anonymous. Big, big transformative changes in the philanthropic world.
Yeah.
At the moment, we're building an idea. There's wide receptivity to the article, and I've loved the way in which the reactions have been manifold. It is everything from thank you for voicing something I've been feeling for years to this feels like a continuation of the patriarchy to how do we thread the needle? How do we understand this issue, but also not leave other people behind? And the fact that we're having that machloket, we're having that discussion and trying to figure it out is, I think, a beautiful reaction to the article in and of itself. Beyond,
Yeah, go ahead.
yeah. No, in terms of then like actual entities who are bringing in or adopting this proposal, I'm in a building phase. We are looking to get partners to pilot this, and if you want to be one of those partners, I would love to engage with that conversation.
Given Anonymous's vast resources, I think there's no doubt. There are two sort of related questions here that Bob and Violet both ask. One says, like, we were warned about egalitarianism and what it would do to the Jewish tradition from many different voices. I remember when women were being ordained, people said, you don't understand how this is going to chase men out of the space. And Violet asks why. That is, why is it when women enter spaces, men seem to leave? What is it in male or human nature that makes that happen? And do you think there's value in preserving spaces for same-sex interactions?
I I really don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater on the question of egalitarianism. In other words, I think that the shul that I davened at in DC was DC Minyan. It was an incredibly vibrant and beautiful space where
Hmm.
women laned, but men and women still sat separately. And in fact, there was a same-sex couple, two men, who they just decided to sit apart from each other, but on the men's side. And so the question of egalitarianism, I think it's a deeper one in terms of understanding maybe what some of the hypotheses that are being challenged or the way in which it might be implemented are different than this notion of we have to keep the genders and the sexes separate. But I do think but building on that, there is huge evidence to demonstrate the value. And maybe it's not for everybody. This is not a thing that's a one size fits all for everybody. But there is tremendous value in especially those formative years, these teen years, of allowing people to be in spaces where certain societal pressures don't manifest in the same way. I can
Right.
tell you, as I reflect back, there are two things that I really wish I had done differently in those formative years. I think had I been in a boys-only institution without divulging too much personal,
Right.
tochacha here, I would have been far less distracted. And also, I wish I had took a gap year. I was not emotionally or intellectually mature enough to be in college my freshman year. And for 3 years, I lived, Mark Twain's axiom, don't let class get in the way of your education.
Right.
It wasn't until my senior year. And so from a Jewish standpoint, I think that there are real questions to engage with, and there are millennia of when the Amidah was written. Why was it only Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov who were put in the beginning opening paragraphs? I would love to be part of the debate and discussion of why also add Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, and Leah. But if we're going to add them stam, like if we're just going to add them simply because, hey, why are the guys there and not the girls? I think we're missing a far more important understanding of the conversation to get there.
I think that if people are honest with themselves, both men and women, they will say that a conversation that is same-sex changes automatically and in sometimes dramatically when someone of the opposite sex comes into the conversation. So I think that it is certainly true that there is a freedom of exchange and a certain understanding, especially when you're younger, but all through life, that happens in same-sex conversations that is very valuable, just as obviously it's extremely valuable to have conversations that include everyone, and that this would have to be tweaked in a way that would sort of serve both purposes in a certain sense, because I think for girls and women as well, these kinds of groups could be enormously valuable, even though we're addressing today, particularly the problems that boys and young men are having. So the other thing that I wanted to ask is a couple of people have noted, including Warren is one, and then I think another anonymous, is that Orthodox families have seem to have figured out how to do this much better than conservative and reform families. Um, is the problem moving away from tradition? Is the problem being too closely aligned to American society? How do you see it?
There are literal books, I mean, like libraries written about this.
Yes.
To
Well, yeah, we
quote
don't need
again,
libraries. We need a 5-minute answer. That's
yeah.
the
So I think that it comes from first. If you're not already reading all the other essays, Michal Biton wrote this beautiful essay, and one of the things that she identifies here is the particularly Ashkenazi, like this European sense of intellectualism. We've got to understand everything. The German and especially like the German in me from my grandfather. Have 10 of these books are the books that he wrote. He was the Kant, like the ideas of these philosophies around understanding, well, can we prove God exists? Can we
right.
prove that religion matters? Can we prove that Jews are different than others? As opposed to just a family side. Like this is what our family does. Our family are Bills fans. Our family roots for the Bengals. Our family doesn't even watch football. These family traditions are pieces of the Jewish story that I think have been lost in an American society. I also think that one of the pieces of Judaism that we've lost from an experiential standpoint is
Hmm.
just how wonderfully indigenous our culture is. The people who look at whether it's keeping kosher or wrapping tefillin or doing anything of these rituals as like, oh, that's just what the super Orthodox Jews do, as opposed to having done it and loving by the way, they're my grandfathers who have both passed. This is their tefillin. I look at it every single day to think about just how wonderfully physically engaged our traditions are with these signs and reminders. All of the data that shows that meditating 10 minutes a day can literally rewire your brain. The same can be true of tefillin. We have an aversion of doing tefillin because it's too religious versus sitting with a Headspace app
Yeah,
because
right.
somebody saw it on a TED Talk. So I think that these are huge parts of um, when I wrote this article, I was invited to give a moonshot. And I love this. Like, let's go to the moon.
Right.
And I immediately thought about the story that I love from the space race of the US and NASA, who spent millions of dollars developing a pen that could write upside down in zero gravity.
Hmm.
And the Russians used a pencil. We have pencils. I remember my friends who went to Jewish day school and stopped for a McDonald's cheeseburger on the way home. If your parents are saying it's important enough for us to spend $40,000 a year on Jewish education because we're Jews, but we're not those kinds of Jews, it sends a really mixed message to a developing brain. And so I think that we would find that if people really leaned into Jewish ritual with open minds, open hearts, and really loved what our tradition teaches, they would find a remarkable, remarkable world.
That's it's a wonderful story. I'm afraid we've been way too occupied with the eraser end of that pencil in Jewish life and not sufficiently appreciative of all the wonderful things that the point can write. It does illustrate something really important, which I think is the undergirding of your article, and I want to emphasize it. In because you just spoke about it, that is, it is a reinvigoration of what Judaism already does. It is not the importation of something new into Judaism to enable us to do it, and it's more reclaiming what has been lost and not creating something new in order to reclaim a tradition that that is in search of new innovation so that it can work again.
Well,
And
so if I
yes,
can flip,
please.
I mean, to quickly like flip the role of moderator to you is how many millions of dollars have been spent trying to create an innovative shul program to bring people back into the pews?
Right. Exactly. Herschel asks along these lines, he says, what you're saying is great, but I don't understand. Rabbi Wolpe just asked about Orthodox. You're both afraid to face the elephant in the room. Apparently, there are several elephants in this room. The room must be very crowded. But here's this elephant. There's
Yeah.
one word missing, Torah. Why are the
Yeah.
yeshivot and kollalim successful? We should do tradition instead of studying. We should do, I'm sorry, meditation instead of studying Talmud. That was a question.
Well, so what I hope that the point that I was making was actually that the Jewish community spends too much time on Headspace and not enough time reading Torah. In
Right.
the last couple of years, have embarked on my own study where it's not only holding myself accountable to read the Parsha every week, but also to do something where I share a public thought.
Right.
Instagram, writing an article. If anybody on this, please subscribe to my weekly Parsha insights on fatherhood. I was astonished.
How do they subscribe? Just tell them where.
I'll put a link in the chat, but it's
Great.
level three, LEVELIII dot KIT.com, level3.kit.com. Put your email in and then you'll get it.
Thank you.
I was astonished at how KIT, KIT, keep in touch. Sorry, Al. I was astonished at how much was in the text and also how much I thought was is not in the text. Our Torah is a remarkable, remarkable tool in terms of understanding human psychology, global geopolitics, business, every aspect of life is in Torah, and it's a beautiful tradition that does not shy away. In fact, I haven't really workshopped this, so I hope this works with what I'm about to share, especially relevant to the conversation about men, which is at times when people ask, well, where are all the women in Torah? Where are the women in Tanakh? First of all, there are many very important female voices that we need to listen to very carefully. And my read at this stage of my life is that Torah is a lot of understanding the ways in which men have messed up in society, and it's the tshuva they do. So how are we understanding the way Adam messed up? How are we understanding the way Noah messed up? How are we understanding how Avram messed up? And then the repair and how we get to finally Torah at Sinai. Where are the women? They're not messing up. They're just not making the same mistakes that the men are making. So we don't need to record all those mistakes.
Yeah, well, there's good historical precedent for that, after all, in the Jewish tradition about men messing up and women not messing up. Um, that has happened before, even in Egypt, when the men decided not to procreate, and it was the women who saved the Jewish people by insisting that that was a lack of faith.
By the way, two midwives, two people who are in the heel industry, going back to Richard Reeves.
Yes. Um, And the other question that I think is recurring again and again and again is the question of how much this has to be supported by what happens in the home and how we reach families beyond the institution, because every synagogue knows in the in the conservative and reform world that in a certain sense they're playing catch up. And
Mhm.
when the kid comes to them, it's not a kid who has an atmosphere of deep learned Yiddishkeit at home. And there was a time, in fact, when most conservative and reform families came from Orthodox backgrounds and the parents were learned, but that disappears in a generation. So, how do we inspire homes to want to be a part of a program like this? Um, what sort of pitch do you make to the Jewish father or mother who is harassed and has a couple of boys and says, why should I send my boys to more programs?
I have sat at policy tables, strategy tables, fundraising tables, programming tables. The most important and most overlooked table is the kitchen table. Everything comes back to the kitchen table.
Yeah,
In politics, we talk about the kitchen table conversation. I think it was FDR who had the kitchen cabinet,
yeah.
who like this is where we are, where everything is taking place at the kitchen
I
table.
just want to interrupt for 1 second to say that Neusner used to call the rabbinic tradition a table fellowship, that the table was
And
actually at the center of it. Yeah,
by the way, this is I don't know how many people on this call are familiar with a Daf Gemara, but like this conversation, this is a centuries old table.
right.
And studying is an invitation to come and sit at a table. So the pitch that I would make to any of these parents is it is a family conversation where everybody is learning together. And I got to tell you, my kids are only 4 and 2. The amount that I've learned about life from my 4-year-old is more than I've learned in semesters at college. And what I learned from watching my wife be a mom is more than I probably could ever learn sitting in a seminar. And so the way that I can show up as a father with humility of the areas that I don't yet know is a huge part of this. And by the way, let's go back to where and why are the places that men are struggling and why are they opting out of some of these spaces? Brene Brown is renowned for talking about the power of vulnerability. And she tells a story that has gotten millions and millions and millions of views on YouTube about a man who came up to her after one of her seminars and said, "Why are you not talking about men?" And she said, "What do you mean? Of course I'm talking about men." And he said, "No, you're not. You're talking about vulnerability. But I've got a wife and 2 daughters at home who would rather see me die on my white horse than get off of it." And understanding the way in which vulnerability shows up differently, especially for men, is something that we don't talk enough about. There's a story, and to the last question, so we have enough time. There's a story that even in the US military, in the Air Force, they used to teach vulnerability. Part of training was about vulnerability and learning how to be with your co-combatants. And after the Korean War, they got rid of it. The training no longer even exists. And so if we look at the ways in which American servicemen are and women are suffering with PTSD and don't have the resources, I would imagine that there's a huge part that we can point to about in basic training, we're not teaching them those foundational coping skills.
And I will take what you said very beautifully and turn it around to say, in my own life, the place where I learned most was at my father's Shabbos table, no question about it. And if I could make one, if I had plenipotentiary power in the Jewish world and could make one innovation, it would be that everybody sits together, not only at Shabbos, but at dinner. And the dinner is a family dinner with no phones and people talk to each other. I think that is a tremendous incubator, not only of love, but also of learning. And speaking of both, we want to thank you, Adam,
Can
for all that you've
I
given.
give one
Yeah,
sentence on
sure,
at the end here? Because a
sure.
lot of the questions, which I totally appreciate and understand, are centered on the institution of like the synagogue. How do we get more people to show up at a
Right.
synagogue in these ways? And in the Orthodox community, especially if you go to Israel, they have shtibels. Like the reason why a synagogue exists is because you need a minyan. You go in, you daven shachrit, mincha, mariv, you check the box, and you're out. All you need are 9 other people. The synagogues in the non-Orthodox world have created their own institutions.
Right.
Therefore, the questions of survivability, of participation are different. I'm not saying they're wrong. I'm not saying they're outdated. I'm not saying there isn't an opportunity to invigorate. But the question around why does a synagogue add value to a Jewish family is a very different question to explore in non-Orthodoxy, where we don't look at davening 3 times a day as an
Right.
obligation versus Orthodoxy.
We want to thank Adam Teitelbaum very much for both for his essay in SAPIR in the aspiration issue, which I hope you will sign up for at sapirjournal.org. And also, please sign up for our SAPIR Conversations. We want to thank Hanan Weissman and Yael Warwick for facilitating this conversation and all that we do here at SAPIR and at the Maimonides Fund. And when you go on our podcast, please rate us and leave us a review. And I hope it's a good one. Thank you so much, Adam. And thank you, everyone. Bye bye.
Kodesh Tov.
Chodesh Tov.